My name is Aisha Robinson, and I am a 40-year-old black woman who has spent most of her life in the heartbeat of New Orleans. People know me here as the owner of Bayou Bloom, a flower and event design studio that has become my second skin. On the surface, I am the picture of strength, a businesswoman, a daughter, a friend, a woman who has built something beautiful with her own 2 hands. But if you had seen me just a few years ago, you would have met someone completely different, a woman who believed she had finally reached her happy ending, only to watch it collapse in a single night. That night, my wedding night, should have been the pinnacle of joy. The mansion glowed like a storybook scene, chandeliers spilling golden light across polished wood, jazz humming through the walls, and guests raising glasses in celebration. I walked down the aisle, with every heartbeat echoing in my chest, believing I was stepping into forever. At the end of that aisle stood Marcus Bennett, the man I thought God himself had sent to be my partner, my protector, the father of the children I still dreamed of. And right beside me, smoothing my veil with steady hands and smiling like the sister she had always claimed to be, was Tasha Green, my best friend for over 2 decades. No one questioned my choice of maid of honor. Why would they? She knew me better than anyone, and I trusted her with every corner of my heart. But what no one saw, not even me, was the storm brewing behind those smiles. What was supposed to be a vow of eternal love became the scene of my deepest betrayal. By sunrise, the foundation of my marriage and my oldest friendship had been destroyed by the people I trusted most. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a story of rescue. It is a story of how a woman was broken, burned, and rebuilt herself stronger than ever. The wedding had all the makings of a southern fairy tale. We chose a historic mansion in the Garden District, its wrought iron balconies draped with ivy and its grand oak trees stretching their arms like guardians over the courtyard. I wanted something timeless, something that carried the weight of history, and that old house delivered. Guests whispered about its elegance, the chandeliers glowing as if they had been polished just for us, the floors creaking with stories of generations past. Marcus looked every bit the groom women dream about, tall, poised, handsome in a tailored gray suit. When he smiled, the room seemed to brighten, and I reminded myself that this was real, that I had somehow been chosen for this moment. His mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, and my father squeezed my hand proudly before walking me down the aisle. Everything appeared flawless, like the happy ending my mother had prayed I would one day find. And then there was Tasha Green. She wasn't just standing by my side. She seemed to move through the day, as if she owned it. She adjusted the train of my gown before I stepped into the garden, made sure every flower petal on the aisle was perfectly placed, and whispered in my ear, "This is your day, sis. You deserve all of it." For nearly 20 years, she had been the sister I never had by blood, the woman who had held me through heartbreaks, celebrated my triumphs, and promised that nothing could ever come between us. Our connection was so obvious that no one ever questioned why she was my maid of honor. To the outside world, it made sense. To me, it was unquestionable. And as I stood there with Marcus waiting at the altar and Tasha beaming at my side, I thought I was surrounded by loyalty on both fronts. A man who loved me, and a friend who would die for me. But even fairy tales in the South carry shadows. I didn't realize it then, but under the glow of chandeliers and the rhythm of jazz, betrayal was already dancing its way into the room. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there. Small fractures hidden beneath the glossy surface of perfection. On the day of the wedding, I tried to tell myself it was nothing but nerves. But a woman's intuition doesn't lie. It whispers, even when you beg it to stay silent. Marcus was charming as always, greeting relatives with his polished smile, thanking guests with words rehearsed to perfection. But when he looked at me, there were moments, fleeting but sharp, when his eyes seemed distant. During our vows, right after he said "I do," a shadow flickered across his face. It was so brief that the applause and cheers drowned it out, but I felt it like a draft slipping through a closed door. I brushed it off, convincing myself that every groom felt the weight of the moment. Tasha, meanwhile, was flawless to the point of unease. She anticipated every move I made before I made it, handing me water before I realized I was thirsty, adjusting my veil before I felt it slip, hovering so close that her perfume clung to me more than my own. Her laughter that night was louder than usual, as if it had been rehearsed. Her smile was wide, almost too wide, like a mask she was determined not to let slip. And once, just once, I caught her eyes on Marcus longer than they should have lingered. Little details kept piling up, a seating chart rearranged without my approval, a floral arrangement swapped at the last minute, though I hadn't asked for it, Marcus pouring Tasha a glass of wine when she was well within reach of her own. Each moment seemed too small to matter on its own, but together, they hummed with an energy I couldn't name. Still, I silenced the voice inside me. This was my wedding day. This was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. I told myself not to ruin it with suspicion, but deep in my chest, a knot had already begun to form, a knot that would tighten until it choked the very breath out of me. New Orleans has a rhythm that seeps into your bones, whether you invite it or not. The city hums with history, brass bands on street corners, second-line parades weaving through neighborhoods, gospel spilling out of church doors on Sunday mornings. That night, standing in the courtyard of the Garden District mansion, I felt wrapped in that rhythm. Jazz drifted in from a nearby block. Cicadas hummed in the trees, and lantern light danced against the wrought iron gates. To me, it felt as if the city itself was blessing my union, whispering, "This is your moment." For a black woman raised here, the day carried more than personal significance. It was cultural, generational. My mother, regal in her wide-brimmed hat, sat near the front row, her smile radiant with prayers answered. My father stood tall, his pride so palpable it pressed against my heart as he handed me over to Marcus. Cousins filled the air with laughter, aunts fanned themselves against the southern heat, and friends toasted to forever with glasses of champagne. It was community, legacy, and love all tied together in a single evening. Everything around me sang of belonging. The scent of gumbo and pralines floated in from the kitchen. The string of lights above the tables flickered like stars brought down to earth. The city's pulse throbbed beneath our feet, a reminder that we were part of something larger than ourselves. For a fleeting moment, I believed I was exactly where I was meant to be, cradled by tradition, supported by family, stepping into a future I had long prayed for. But peace in New Orleans has always been deceptive, as fragile as Spanish moss trembling in the wind. While I basked in the glow of history and community, betrayal was already sitting at my table, sipping from my glass. smiling at me through familiar faces. I didn't know it then, but the city that raised me was about to become the stage for my greatest heartbreak. The courtyard glowed in the soft amber light of the setting sun. White petals lined the aisle, scattered carefully across the cobblestone path, while a string quartet filled the evening with the sweet ache of violins. Guests leaned forward in their chairs as my father walked me toward the altar, his arm steady, his presence grounding me in a moment that already felt too surreal to grasp. My heart pounded like a drum, both from nerves and from the overwhelming belief that I was walking into my forever. Marcus stood at the end of the aisle, handsome in his gray suit, his posture poised but not rigid, his smile spread across his face as our eyes met, and for a moment the world blurred into nothing but him. I saw the man who had whispered late-night promises, who had told me I was his anchor, who had painted a picture of a future so vivid I could practically touch it. The officiant began speaking, his voice carrying through the garden with a solemn reverence. Words about love, fidelity, and unity floated in the air, almost too perfect in their timing. My palms dampened, not from doubt, but from the sheer intensity of it all, and when it was my turn, I said I do, without hesitation. My voice trembled, but it was full of conviction, carrying years of hope and longing in just 2 syllables. The crowd erupted in smiles and tears, my mother dabbing her eyes with the corner of her lace handkerchief. My friends leaned toward one another, whispering their excitement. I glanced at Tasha, standing radiant in her role, her grin stretching wide, her hands clasped as though she were holding the weight of my happiness in her palms. Then Marcus spoke. His "I do" came out steady, almost rehearsed, accompanied by that practiced smile of his. But just after, there was something, a flicker, so quick I almost doubted myself. His eyes shifted downward, his jaw tightened, and the glow that had filled his face dimmed for just an instant. The moment was so subtle that no one else seemed to notice, but I did. I felt it ripple through me like a cold breeze sneaking under the warmth of a quilt. I reminded myself that nerves could twist anyone's expression. Weddings are heavy, and vows are more than words. They are chains linking 2 lives together. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. Maybe I was too sensitive. I forced myself to believe it, because the alternative was too terrifying to imagine. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Marcus leaned in for the kiss. Cameras flashed, cheers echoed, and petals fluttered down from above. His lips touched mine, but something in the kiss felt restrained, distant, as though it was meant more for the audience than for me. The applause was thunderous, yet inside me, a quiet unease began to hum, faint but undeniable. Still, I smiled for the crowd, clutched his hand tightly, and walked back down the aisle beside him. Every eye in the courtyard was fixed on us, the perfect couple in the perfect setting. But as I stole a glance at Marcus, I saw again that shadow in his gaze, that silence behind his smile. And though I buried the thought beneath the laughter and music that followed, a part of me already knew. Something was not as it seemed. The reception was everything I had dreamed of, at least on the surface. Long banquet tables stretched across the courtyard, dressed with ivory linens and glowing with flickering candles. Above us, strings of golden bulbs swayed in the breeze, their light mingling with the first stars peeking through the Louisiana sky. The scent of Cajun spices and roasted shrimp hung in the air, carried by laughter and the clinking of glasses. It was the kind of night people would talk about for years. The kind of night I thought would mark the start of my forever. Marcus floated through the crowd like he had been born for it. He shook hands with my uncles, swapped stories with cousins, and charmed my mother with compliments that made her cheeks flush. He laughed easily, the way he always did when there was an audience, and everyone seemed to adore him. To them, he was the perfect new husband. But to me, something was missing. Each time our eyes met across the table, his gaze darted away too quickly, as if holding it too long might reveal something he didn't want me to see. And then there was Tasha. She never left my side, hovering like a shadow dressed in satin. She adjusted my napkin before I even reached for it, refilled my glass before I asked, whispered reminders in my ear as though I were a child who needed constant guidance. To anyone else, it looked like loyalty, the kind of devotion only a true friend could give. But to me, it began to feel suffocating, as though she were trying to control the rhythm of my every move. I caught small moments that unsettled me. Marcus pouring her a glass of wine with a smile too soft, their fingers brushing in a way that lingered just a second longer than necessary. Tasha leaning in close to whisper something that made him laugh. Not the polite laugh he gave to my father's jokes, but the kind that reached his eyes. It was subtle, so subtle that no one else seemed to notice, but my stomach clenched with each passing second. The toasts came next. My father stood, voice breaking as he spoke of his pride, his hope, and his certainty that Marcus would be the man to protect me, cherish me. The guests applauded, glasses raised high. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He lifted his champagne flute almost reluctantly, as if even celebration weighed heavy on him. I forced myself to ignore the unease, to laugh when laughter was expected, to lean into the role of radiant bride. I told myself I was imagining it, that nerves made shadows out of nothing. Yet beneath the string lights and jazz melodies, I felt the faint stirrings of a storm, invisible but relentless, creeping closer with every passing moment. I should have paid more attention to that feeling. But instead, I smiled for the cameras, clinked my glass to his, and convinced myself that this was happiness. By the time the last song faded and the final guests drifted into the night, I was brimming with nervous anticipation. My feet ached from hours in heels, and my cheeks hurt from smiling. But none of it mattered. Tonight wasn't just another night. It was our beginning. The bridal suite had been prepared like something out of a magazine, rose petals scattered across the bed, candles flickering on every surface, champagne chilling in a silver bucket by the window. It was a room made for intimacy, for sealing vows with love. I closed the heavy oak door behind us, my heart hammering with a mixture of exhaustion and excitement. Marcus slipped off his jacket, loosened his tie, and let out a sigh so heavy it seemed to drain the warmth from the room. I waited for him to cross the space between us, to gather me into his arms the way I had imagined countless times. Instead, he avoided my gaze, his movements deliberate, mechanical. "Finally," I whispered with a nervous laugh, trying to break the tension, but he didn't answer. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, unbuttoning his shirt, then stood and walked across the room. "I'm tired," he muttered flatly, his back still to me. At first, I thought it was a joke. I even smiled, waiting for the moment he would turn around, scoop me into his arms, and tell me he couldn't possibly be too tired for this night, but no laughter came. He slipped off his shoes, climbed onto the small twin bed in the corner, the one meant more for decoration than for use, and turned his face to the wall. The silence pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. I stood frozen in my gown, the satin suddenly feeling too tight, too heavy on my skin. My mind scrambled for excuses. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe the weight of the day had drained him. Maybe. I lowered myself onto the marriage bed, its petals cold against my skin. Tears pricked my eyes, but I bit them back, unwilling to let them spill. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for him to change his mind, to come to me, to whisper something that would soothe the knot tightening in my chest. But all I heard was the steady rhythm of his breathing from across the room, as though we were strangers forced to share a space. Hours passed like that, me clutching the silence, him lost in whatever world he had chosen over mine. I had imagined our first night as husband and wife would be filled with laughter, passion, the kind of intimacy that binds two people together forever. Instead, I lay alone in a bed that smelled of roses and disappointment, my soul breaking quietly beneath the flicker of candlelight, and though I didn't know it then, that silence, colder than any argument, sharper than any insult, was only the beginning of my unraveling. I must have drifted into a shallow sleep, because the next thing I remember was waking with a jolt. A sound, faint, muffled, almost like a groan, crept through the quiet of the mansion. At first, I thought it was a dream. I sat up, listening hard, my heart thudding in my chest. Marcus's bed in the corner was empty. Barefoot, I stepped onto the cold floor, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The noises grew clearer as I followed the dim light seeping from a room at the end of the hall. A low laugh, hushed but familiar. A gasp quickly stifled. My body went rigid. That room belonged to Marcus's mother, who had excused herself earlier, claiming she felt unwell and needed to leave for medicine. She hadn't returned. So why was Marcus inside? I moved closer, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorframe. I pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath. The sound of the bed creaking, another muffled moan, and then her voice, Tasha's voice, clear, unmistakable, dripping with a kind of intimacy I had never heard from her before. My best friend, my sister in everything but blood. The air left my lungs. My knees nearly gave out. But before I could retreat, I heard him. Marcus, whispering her name, his voice low and urgent. There was no mistaking it. The world tilted beneath me, every promise, every vow collapsing in a single instant. I leaned against the wall, silent tears running down my face, the weight of betrayal pressing so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I stood frozen, knowing that my entire life had just been rewritten behind that door. And when it finally opened, I was ready to face the ruins. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the mansion, painting the dining hall in soft gold. Guests gathered around long tables filled with fresh fruit, coffee, and beignets, their laughter echoing against the high ceilings. To anyone else, it was the peaceful aftermath of a perfect wedding. To me, it was a stage set for truth. I walked in wearing the same gown from the night before, its hem stained with dirt from pacing outside in the dark. Conversations stilled. My mother's face paled, her hand flying to her chest as she rose from her chair. My father's brows knitted. The same way they used to when I came home past curfew as a teenager. They knew something was wrong, but not how wrong. I cleared my throat, the room falling silent. "I need everyone's attention," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled at my sides. Chairs scraped against the wood floor as family and friends followed me into the main living room, confusion written across their faces. Marcus and Tasha were nowhere to be found. Their absence spoke louder than any words I was about to say. Standing before them, I felt strangely calm. "Last night, on the night of my wedding," I began, "I discovered Marcus and Tasha together in his mother's room." A wave of gasps rolled through the crowd. My mother covered her mouth. My father clenched his fists. No one defended them. No one dared. I continued, my voice stronger now. "I will not stay married to a man who broke his vows before the ink was dry, and I will never again call someone a sister who betrayed me in silence and in shadows." There were no cheers, no applause, just heavy silence, thick with shock and shame. And in that silence, I reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and the first step away from their betrayal. I left the living room without waiting for questions, without giving anyone the chance to soften the truth. My gown still clung to me, heavy with the scent of roses that now felt rotten. As I stepped out of the mansion, the cool air of dawn hit my face like a baptism, sharp and bracing. The once celebratory garden was littered with petals and empty glasses, silent witnesses to a night that had turned to ash. The wrought iron gates of the garden district creaked as I pushed them open. Barefoot, I walked down the brick-lined streets, my dress dragging across the ground, collecting dust and fallen oak leaves. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gray. But for me it felt more like twilight, the end of something I could never get back. Cars hummed in the distance. A streetcar rattled along St. Charles Avenue, and the city around me carried on as if nothing had happened. People were waking to another Sunday in New Orleans. Church bells would soon chime. Kitchens would fill with the smell of coffee and grits. Yet there I was, a bride abandoned on her own wedding night, walking away from the life I thought I was building. I didn't look back at the mansion. I refused to. Every step forward felt like tearing away another piece of fabric stitched from lies. By the time I reached the corner, my gown was streaked brown, my veil tangled, my makeup long gone, but my spine was straight. I might have been shattered inside, but I would not let them see me crawl. That morning, I walked away, not just from Marcus and Tasha, but from the version of myself that once believed love required blindness. By the time I reached my apartment on Esplanade Avenue, the sun had climbed higher, spilling light across the faded hardwood floors. I dropped my keys onto the counter and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. What stared back at me wasn't a bride, not anymore. My mascara had bled into dark rivers. My hair hung loose and tangled, and the hem of my gown was streaked with mud. But beneath the exhaustion, I saw something sharper. Resolve. I didn't change clothes. I didn't shower. I picked up my phone and dialed the one number I knew could turn chaos into order. My attorney, Ms. Evelyn Carter. She had represented me once before in a business contract. A woman with a steel backbone and a reputation for not wasting words. When she answered, her voice was clipped and professional, but softened as soon as she heard mine. "I need to file for divorce," I said, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. "Immediately." She didn't ask me to reconsider. She didn't tell me to wait. She only asked for the details, and I gave them to her without trembling. The betrayal, the timing, the humiliation. I laid it all out like evidence on a table. Within the hour, she had begun drafting papers. By evening, the process was in motion. No counseling, no trial separations, no room for Marcus to twist my pain into apologies I didn't want. I wasn't going to negotiate with someone who had broken me before our marriage had even begun. When I finally hung up, I stood by the window, watching people stroll along the avenue, carefree and unburdened. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to exhale. This wasn't closure yet, but it was the first real step toward reclaiming my life. In the days that followed, grief threatened to consume me, but I refused to let Marcus and Tasha's betrayal become the story that defined me. If my marriage had collapsed overnight, then I would build something stronger in its place, not with love, but with my own two hands. And so, I turned to Bayou Bloom, the flower and event studio I had poured my soul into long before Marcus came along. Work became my refuge. I arrived at the shop before dawn, sweeping the floors, trimming stems, sketching designs for weddings and galas that weren't my own. Every bouquet I crafted felt like a stitch sewing me back together. The fragrance of lilies, the velvet touch of roses, the steady rhythm of arranging centerpieces. All of it gave me purpose, a reason to get out of bed when the weight of shame threatened to pin me down. But it wasn't just about surviving. I wanted Bayou Bloom to thrive, to become more than just a storefront on Magazine Street. I signed up for late-night business classes, learning how to balance books, negotiate contracts, and expand operations. I reached out to vendors, built partnerships, and leaned on the support of my community. Women, especially Black women, who knew what it meant to start over when the world counted you out. Slowly, the studio's reputation grew. Clients began to recognize the unique blend of tradition and modern flair in my designs. Brides trusted me to create the beauty I never got to fully experience on my own wedding night. Every success, every glowing review, felt like another brick laid on the foundation of a new life. A life where I was no longer defined by betrayal, but by resilience. Bayou Bloom wasn't just a business anymore. It was my rebirth. While I was piecing myself back together, Marcus and Tasha were unraveling faster than anyone could have predicted. At first, they tried to present themselves as a couple in love, moving into a sleek apartment in the warehouse district, where the exposed brick walls and skyline views were supposed to symbolize a fresh start. But walls can't hold up a relationship built on lies. The whispers reached me through friends of friends, the shouting matches that spilled out into the hallway, the neighbors who complained about hearing doors slam at midnight. Marcus, who once charmed rooms with his easy laugh, had grown cold and restless. Tasha, who had always prided herself on perfection, began showing up at work disheveled, her confidence chipped away by the very man she betrayed me for. It didn't take long before the pattern repeated itself. Marcus was never a man to settle. Not really. Just months into their so-called relationship, he found someone new. A younger woman with no knowledge of his past. Someone who still believed in his polished smile. He slipped away from Tasha the same way he had slipped away from me, with half-truths, excuses, and the quiet cruelty of indifference. when the inevitable breakup came, it wasn't explosive. It was worse. Marcus simply disappeared, leaving a note on the counter and a closet half empty. Tasha, the woman who once stood beside me as a sister, was left alone with the echoes of her choices. Friends turned their backs. Family members kept their distance, and the city, which had once embraced her, now whispered about her behind closed doors. What they had called love was nothing more than a spark, brief, reckless, destined to burn out. And as their fire turned to ashes, I found a strange, a steady comfort in knowing that I had walked away with something they never would: dignity. While their world crumbled, mine was blooming in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. Bayou Bloom became more than just a flower studio on Magazine Street. It grew into a name people in New Orleans began to recognize and respect. What had once been a quiet storefront now buzzed with life, its windows filled with bold arrangements that mixed Southern tradition with a modern twist. I poured myself into every detail. I started offering full wedding and event planning services, drawing on my own painful lessons to create celebrations that felt authentic and unforgettable. Brides came to me not just for flowers, but for trust. The kind of trust I once lost, but could now give to others. Each bouquet, each centerpiece, each candlelit reception I designed was a promise that joy could still be beautiful, even after heartbreak. Within a year, I expanded into mid-city with a second location, then into Bywater with a smaller boutique studio that catered to artists and young couples who wanted something unique. Local magazines picked up the story of the Black woman who had turned her own tragedy into an empire of beauty. Articles called me a visionary of modern Southern design, but I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because every sale, every contract signed, was proof that I could stand on my own. The phone rang constantly. Hotels wanted partnerships, event planners sought collaborations, and even national bridal magazines reached out for interviews. Bayou Bloom wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And with every ribbon tied and every flower delivered, I felt my roots dig deeper, grounding me in the truth I had almost forgotten. I was capable of building a life that no betrayal could take away. 3 years passed, and with them, the sharp sting of betrayal dulled into something quieter. A scar I carried, but one that no longer throbbed. My days took on a rhythm I had never known before. Mornings began with coffee on the balcony overlooking Esplanade Avenue, afternoons filled with consultations at Bayou Bloom, evenings often ending with a book or a long walk through City Park. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, steady and unshaken. Therapy had helped me untangle the knots I once ignored. I learned that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about facing the memories until they lost their power. I joined a circle of Black women entrepreneurs who met monthly to share resources, celebrate victories, and speak honestly about the challenges of carrying both heritage and ambition on our shoulders. Their stories reminded me that resilience wasn't solitary, it was communal. We were all rebuilding something: families, careers, identities, and in that shared journey, I found strength. The quiet no longer scared me. In the past, I had filled every silence with noise, planning, pleasing, performing, afraid that stillness meant emptiness. Now, stillness felt like peace. I no longer checked my phone obsessively or searched for validation in someone else's gaze. My reflection in the mirror no longer looked like a woman waiting to be chosen. It looked like a woman who had already chosen herself. By the 3rd year, people around me began to notice the change. Friends told me my laugh was louder, my eyes softer. I had stopped bracing for the next heartbreak, and instead started leaning into the possibility of joy. For the first time since that night, I believed I was ready, not to be rescued, but to let someone new walk beside me. It happened on a Thursday afternoon at a small business conference downtown. The convention center was buzzing with energy. Panels on innovation, rows of vendor booths, and entrepreneurs eager to trade business cards like currency. I had been invited to speak about Bayou Bloom's growth, a topic I could now share without flinching. My nerves were steady. After everything I had endured, standing in front of a crowd no longer frightened me. That's when I met Malik Carter. He wasn't flashy, not the type to dominate a room with volume or charm. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet confidence, the kind that made people lean in without realizing why. Malik was a community investor, known for supporting Black-owned businesses across Louisiana. When he introduced himself, his handshake was firm but unhurried, his gaze direct without being invasive. During my presentation, I noticed him in the audience, not just listening but taking notes, nodding at points others might have skimmed over. Afterward, he approached me with questions no one had ever asked. How do you measure the emotional impact of your designs? What legacy do you want Bayou Bloom to leave for the next generation? They weren't surface questions. They were questions that made me pause, dig deeper. We ended up talking long after the session ended, standing by the wide glass windows as the Mississippi River glimmered in the distance. There was no rush, no flirtation disguised as networking. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was simply present, genuinely curious, and respectful of my answers. That night, as I drove home along St. Charles Avenue, the streetcar bells ringing in the distance, I realized something unexpected. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying old wounds in my head. Instead, I was replaying a conversation with a man who hadn't tried to fill my silence, but honored it. And that, more than anything, felt like the beginning of something new. Being with Malik was nothing like the whirlwind romances I used to dream about. There were no grand gestures designed to impress, no frantic urgency to prove devotion. Instead, there was consistency, steadiness, and a kind of warmth that sank deep into my bones. With him, love wasn't a fire that burned hot and fast. It was a steady flame that never wavered, even in the wind. Our nights often looked simple from the outside. Cooking gumbo together in my kitchen, jazz records spinning on the old turntable, laughter spilling out as we argued playfully over seasoning. Sometimes we'd walk hand in hand along the Frenchman Street sidewalks, the neon lights flickering overhead, the music from open bars pouring into the night. He would squeeze my hand lightly, not to claim me, but to remind me he was there. But there were also moments of intensity, moments where every barrier I had built came down. Malik never rushed me, never demanded more than I was ready to give. Yet when I finally let him in, the connection was electric, not reckless, but powerful. His touch carried both desire and reverence, as if he understood that my body held both scars and strength. With him, intimacy wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it and building something new on top of it. I had never known passion that could be both fiery and safe, thrilling yet grounded. With Malik, I discovered that love could be non-niet without chaos, consuming without destroying. It wasn't about escaping reality. It was about creating one where I finally felt at home. Marcus reappeared the way ghosts do, quietly at first, then all at once. It started with short text messages, half-hearted apologies wrapped in nostalgia. I miss your laugh. We could have had it all. I ignored them, each message deleted as quickly as it arrived. But ghosts don't like to be ignored. Soon, he was showing up outside Bayou Bloom, waiting by the curb with that same polished smile that had once disarmed me. He talked about second chances, about being a changed man, about how Tasha had never really meant anything. His words were slick, but they slid right off me. I wasn't that naive bride anymore. Still, Marcus was nothing if not persistent, and persistence in the hands of a manipulator becomes dangerous. One evening, he called with urgency in his voice, asking to meet at a hotel downtown. "Just 5 minutes," he said. "I need closure. I need to tell you the truth." Against my better judgment, curiosity tugged at me. I agreed, but I prepared. What I didn't know then was that Marcus had orchestrated more than a private meeting. He had also lured Malik there, feeding him lies about me, hoping to create a scene that would shatter the trust we had built. When I walked into that dimly lit hotel lounge, Marcus was already rehearsing his performance. Slouched shoulders, sad eyes, the kind of broken man routine meant to reel me back in. But beneath the act, I recognized the same arrogance, the same hunger for control. His words dripped with false repentance, carefully chosen to plant doubt in Malik's heart when he arrived. Marcus thought he had set the stage for my downfall. What he didn't know was that I had brought my own weapon, the truth, ready to be recorded. I walked into that hotel lounge prepared for battle, though Marcus believed I was walking in blind. My phone, discreetly tucked into my clutch, was already recording before I even sat down. He started his performance immediately, voice low, eyes glassy, hands clasped together, as if he were in prayer. "You don't know how much I regret what I did," he began, leaning forward. "Tasha was a mistake. You were always the one. I can't sleep at night knowing I lost you." I let him talk, offering nothing more than a steady gaze. The more silence I gave him, the more he filled it with words. Soon, his tone shifted from remorseful to manipulative. He admitted to inviting Malik, casually dropping that he wanted him to see the truth about me, that Malik needed to understand I was still his. His arrogance betrayed him. He wasn't looking for forgiveness. He was looking for ownership. Every word was captured, crisp and undeniable, on the recording humming quietly in my purse. My stomach churned, but my hands remained steady as I sipped the glass of water in front of me. By the time Malik walked in, Marcus was in full confession mode, speaking loudly enough to make sure Malik heard. Malik froze at the doorway, suspicion clouding his eyes, just as Marcus had planned. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my bag, pressed stop on the recording, and held my phone up. "Before you say another word," I told Malik, "you should hear everything that came out of his mouth tonight." The look on Marcus's face, that split second when he realized the stage he built had crumbled beneath him, was worth every ounce of pain he had caused me. For the first time, I wasn't the woman cornered by his betrayal. I was the woman holding the evidence, and this time, I was the one in control. Malik stood frozen for a moment, his eyes shifting between Marcus and me. The weight of suspicion lingered in the air, exactly the way Marcus had intended. But instead of letting anger take over, I handed Malik my phone, the recording cued and ready. "Listen," I said softly, refusing to break eye contact with him. The room grew still, except for Marcus's own voice spilling from the speaker. Every manipulative word, every calculated confession. Malik's expression changed as the truth unfolded. His jaw tightened, not at me, but at the man who had tried to dismantle what we had built. By the time the recording ended, the scheme was undeniable. Marcus sputtered, trying to recover. "She twisted it, Malik. You don't understand." But Malik didn't even glance at him. He set the phone down gently, then turned to me. His voice was calm, steady. "I believe you. I always did. And now I know exactly what kind of man he is." Relief washed over me, so sharp it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. For the first time in years, I wasn't left standing alone with betrayal. I had someone beside me who chose to trust me, who refused to let lies corrode what we were building. Malik reached for my hand, his grip firm, his eyes unwavering. Marcus stormed out of the lounge, defeated, his footsteps echoing against the tile. I didn't watch him leave. I had no reason to. As Malik and I walked out together, I felt something stronger than victory. It was security, the kind that comes from knowing that love doesn't collapse under pressure, but grows firmer when tested. What Marcus tried to break, Malik and I had only reinforced. And from that night forward, our bond wasn't just about affection. It was about trust forged in fire. Peace has a sound, and it's nothing like the fireworks I once thought love should be. Peace sounds like the turning of a page, while Malik sits beside me on the balcony, the Mississippi River stretching out in the distance, the evening sun melting into shades of amber and rose. It's the faint clink of ice in a glass of sweet tea, the rhythm of cicadas humming in the magnolia trees, the steady breath of a man who doesn't need to fill the silence to prove his love. Our home sits on the edge of the French Quarter, where the cobblestone streets meet the music drifting out of hidden courtyards. The city around us never stops moving, jazz spilling from bars, tourists laughing on Bourbon Street, the streetcar bells chiming down St. Charles Avenue. But inside our walls, there is stillness, a sanctuary. Here, I no longer brace myself for disappointment. Here, I exhale without fear. Sometimes Malik reads while I sip my tea, and sometimes we switch, my words spilling onto the page while he leans back, watching the horizon. There are nights when we dance barefoot in the kitchen, and mornings when we share quiet prayers before the day begins. The passion is still there, warm and steady, but it's no longer laced with anxiety. It's rooted in respect, in the knowledge that love can be both tender and strong. For years, I thought happiness came with grand declarations, with dramatic promises and sweeping romance. But now, I know better. True happiness is a steady presence, a safe hand to hold, and the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you belong. Sitting on that balcony with Malik, I finally understood. I wasn't waiting for a fairy tale anymore. I was living my piece. Tucked away in the top of my closet sits a box I rarely open but refuse to throw away. It's not large, just a simple wooden chest with brass corners, but inside it carries the weight of an entire life I once thought was mine. The wedding invitation embossed with gold lettering, a pressed magnolia bloom from my bouquet. Photographs of me in that gown, smiling with a confidence I didn't realize was borrowed. Even the veil, folded carefully, though its edges are stained from the dirt of the Garden District streets. For a long time, I couldn't look at those things without feeling the air leave my lungs. They weren't keepsakes. They were reminders of humiliation, of betrayal dressed up as devotion. But time, like water, softens even the sharpest stones. Now, when I lift the lid, I don't see a woman broken. I see the woman I was, hopeful, trusting and willing to believe in forever. And I honor her, because without her, I wouldn't have become the woman I am today. The box isn't a shrine to pain. It's a marker of survival. Each item inside tells a story of how far I've traveled, from a night of silence and tears to mornings filled with laughter and strength. I keep it not to relive the past, but to respect it, to remember that rebirth often grows from the ashes of what once was. Sometimes Malik catches me holding one of those photographs, and he'll ask softly, "Why keep it?" My answer is always the same. Because this box doesn't hold my sorrow anymore. It holds my resurrection. And when I close the lid, I smile. I know the chapter is finished, but the lesson remains. A reminder that I didn't just survive betrayal. I was reborn from it. If there's one truth my journey carved into me, it's this. The strongest love you will ever experience is the love you give yourself. For years, I thought devotion meant sacrificing pieces of who I was to keep someone else whole. I believed endurance was proof of loyalty, even when it left me empty. But betrayal taught me what comfort never could, that staying where there is no respect is the slowest form of self-destruction. I learned that love without honesty is just theater, and promises without action are nothing but noise. Real love doesn't demand you shrink to fit someone else's insecurities. It doesn't ask you to mute your brilliance or beg for scraps of attention. Real love, the kind that lasts, grows where there is respect, trust, and freedom. Malik never tried to save me. He didn't walk into my life with grand speeches or demands. He found me whole, scarred but standing, and chose me that way. That's how I know this love is different, because it isn't built on rescue or desperation. It's built on choice. Every day, he chooses me, and every day, I choose him. Not because we need to, but because we want to. And yet, even with Malik by my side, I know my peace doesn't depend on him. It depends on me. That's the lesson I carry for every woman who has been betrayed, humiliated, or abandoned. Your worth is not determined by who stays or who leaves. The moment you choose yourself, truly and without apology, you've already won. Everything else that comes after, whether it's companionship, success, or passion, is just the gift, never the foundation. When I look back now, I realize my story was never truly about Marcus or Tasha. It wasn't about betrayal or even revenge. It was about dignity, the one thing I refused to surrender, even when everything else was stripped away. That dignity became the seed of my rebirth. It grew into resilience, into a business that flourished, into a love that was calm and true. Most of all, it grew into a peace I had once thought was impossible for me. I want every woman listening to remember this. Heartbreak does not define you. Betrayal does not break you. If anything, it reveals the strength you didn't know you had. You do not have to stay in a place where your worth is questioned or where your loyalty is treated like weakness. You are more than someone's second choice. You are your own foundation. Sometimes people ask me, would you ever trust again after what happened? And my answer is always simple. Not only did I trust again, I learned to choose better, because once you learn to love yourself fiercely, you'll never settle for anyone who doesn't honor that love. So now, I want to turn the question to you. Have you ever walked away from something that was breaking you, only to find yourself stronger on the other side? If my story resonated with you, if you saw pieces of your own journey in mine, I would love for you to share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it today. Together, we remind each other of the truth. Real love starts when you finally choose yourself.